recording, so I think it's up. Do you want to talk about the certificate of attendance, Sharice, or am I doing? I'm sorry.
Either is fine.
Go
You
ahead.
will
I'll
get
give it back.
certificates. You will be eligible to get a certificate of attendance if you would like one. It would identify that you've participated in this 1-hour webinar. And if you do want a certificate of attendance, please just email us at calpro@air.org and let us know you attended the webinar today, and we will happily get a certificate issued to you. All right, so change. Change happens. How to negotiate through it is a critical piece of it, though. So understanding that it happens and that as administrators, we need to understand how to work through it, we've invited Steve Curiel, who's the principal at Huntington Beach Adult School within the Huntington Beach Union High School District, to speak with us this afternoon about change that's happening that he's working with as an administrator and how he's negotiating through it. Steve is also the current state president for CCAE, and so many of you know him through his work there, and he's done significant work helping to advocate for adult education and adult education funding throughout the state over a number of years, and we are really lucky to have him sharing on negotiating through the change that can happen. He has some slides that he'll be highlighting along with a handout, and I wanted to make sure that you are aware of those. If you look on the bottom left, you'll see the handout chat, and you'll see the PDF of the PowerPoint there, along with a PDF of a handout called Minimizing Negative Impacts from Change. So feel free to download either or both of those, either now or at the end of the session. If you have them now, if you have the time now, go ahead and do that so that you can easily follow along with his presentation. Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started on change happening and how we negotiate through it. Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you, Sharice, and thank you, Blair, for setting that up. And so just good afternoon, everyone. I know this is a busy time for many of us, and especially with changes that are constantly coming our way that we're dealing with. It's just more work for us. So I appreciate your taking the time to listen to this. I hope it's of value to you. And I've tried to make it as concise as possible, but it is a big topic that I would always enjoy having a conversation if we run into each other somewhere down the road more about. And I'd love to hear what you guys are doing out there. And so just a little bit about me. Just to kind of give you, for those of you who don't know me or haven't had a chance to talk with me, I've been doing adult ed now for 17 years. I actually started as a science teacher at Warren High School in Downing, and so I moved into administration pretty quickly. And during my start with adult ed, I was just shocked at how different it was from K-12 and the high school environment, and really realizing that the classes I took in administration didn't quite prepare me for all the different aspects that we deal with in adult ed. At least that was my feeling, and so I did actually start and completed a MBA program to help me understand better the business side of adult ed, as we often are stuck with or have to deal with business type decisions around budgets, marketing, and such things. So I also did the Business Academy, which helped me understand the business side of schools and school districts, because many times we're dealing with our district folks, and they have a certain perspective, so I felt that was a need to understand that side better. And I'm always out talking to people, most of you know, and actually I consider myself an introvert, so it's interesting. I do like to talk to people about adult ed. I guess I can't say that anymore, and most of you probably are chuckling that I would even say that. So that kind of sets me up as you might say an entrepreneurial thinker, kind of a business mindset, but I'm always got the student's best interest as my top priority. So I really try to leverage whatever I understand about business concepts and applying it to the school environment and in a way that just at the end of it benefits our students. And so In that time I've been in adult ed, I've had to deal with AB 23, if you guys remember that, on an ability for adult schools to go over what at that time was called a cap and actually generate more funding. So there were some business decisions around that our schools made both at Downing and at went through flexibility, obviously, went through AB 6, AB 104, and so been very involved in all those and changes and looking for opportunities in each of those instances. So what changed? For those of you that maybe, and I know you're familiar with all these, but and this is not to stress anyone out, but we've got AEBG. That's got this concept of shared governance that we get to work through and work with our partners through. New data and accountability metrics, ed codes, which ed codes apply now that we have AEBG, which ones don't apply. We've got WIOA, for those of you that are agencies under WIOA, with the new IELCE and IET and core performance follow-up surveys coming up that we'll be doing next year. Non-credit expansion of the colleges. I know that's a big concern for many of us out there. What does that look like? How is it going to impact our programs? Strong workforce. I'm not sure if any of you are out there working with your colleges and involved in strong workforce, but that's something that intentionally the legislature did include AEBG as a voice in that strong workforce development at the local colleges. And so that's something that I try to be aware of. Guided pathways, relatively new, but also AEBG mentioned in that. And I believe it's mentioned. I actually have to go back and confirm that. But what's the impact on adult ed? I know a lot of consortia are talking about AEBG and how guided pathways will help their students under the adult ed block grant. And we have LCAP, LCFF that drives our K-12 side. Some changes coming about, proposed changes as far as accountability, a little more accountability maybe for the districts, and what's that mean for our school. And then you have charter adult schools. That's relatively new. They've been happening for the last couple of years, been popping up across the state. And again, what does that mean for adult schools, and how does that impact your program, especially if you've got one down the street from your school? And that's all within the last 3 years, believe it or not. And so we're dealing with this time of change. I think my staff is sick and tired of the change, to be honest, and I just keep reassuring them that it's not going to change. If anything's for sure, it is that change will continue to happen, and we just got to get used to it and develop ways of dealing with it. So, and so with that, I know all of us are at different stages. Some of us may be more involved with some of these changes coming about, but we have a survey that we want to put up, or a poll, I should say. And if you could pick the ones that you are dealing with or are most concerned about right now, and I can get a feel for where you guys are as a group. Right, very, very interesting. Obviously, ABG is the number one, and it's the first one to pop to my mind as well, and that's why it just ended up being first, not just because it starts with an A. And then WIOA, kind of in line with what I would somewhat rank these programs as well. And we actually have some folks dealing with charter programs in their area, so I'm not necessarily going to talk a lot about charter schools, charter adult schools. I know there'll probably be more coming hopefully from CDE or some other folks about how that works. But obviously, we're all dealing with a number of these factors. I think most of us probably mark 3 or more of these changes programs that are changing or impacting our schools. Thank you for sharing that information. I'll go back to got theirs entered, and I'll go back to the presentation. That helps me. All right, and I guess that shows everybody we're not alone. We're all dealing with these topics. Okay, the types of change. So before I go on to how to deal with change, I thought it important to go back and describe. Not all changes are the same. You have a varying degree of complexity, if you will, starting with developmental changes. And these are minor changes typically that you would control or initiate in response to a situation. So an example might be you start collecting Social Security numbers. And that all it entailed was putting a new line on your enrollment form and just explaining to students that it's something that you are now required or you've decided you need to collect in order to track student data. So that would be minor change, not much of an impact to your program, just moving forward and trying to move your program, but ultimately not a big impact on most folks. And you've got transitional type changes, and those are, you might look at a process where you're changing that process or a program. And in those situations, I give the example of online classes that we actually implemented a few years ago, an online system, and that was isolated to our high school diploma program. Relatively, I say that from an administrator standpoint, not that difficult, but my staff would probably disagree. They did have to go through some training. They were actually in agreement this is something we needed to do, faced with having to redo our packets, which we had a packet-based program at the time. So this was in response to really the Common Core college career readiness standards, and looking at our current curriculum that was packet-based and how would we go about revamping all of that, and or looking at an online system. So we went through that process, and that's a transitional change, not a lot of impact on the rest of the program, the rest of the school. And so, again, kind of middle ground as far as change. Then you've got transformational change, and these are the big ones some of us might be going through right now. Change that's typically forced on a system because what we're currently doing isn't working. Again, I go back to AEG, not that things in the past aren't working, but definitely a new direction for our schools. I think one of the examples I would use, I think many of us that have been in adult ed for since 2009, flexibility, how that impacted many of our schools, and the way we adapted to flexibility. At the end of that, during that time and maybe a few years after that, many of our schools looked different than what they originally looked like when we were getting apportionment. A lot more fee-based programs, maybe we're a lot smaller, maybe our enrollment processes changed because you had to implement a fee-based program. So that would be at a higher level, more impactful change, and really changes the school, changes the culture of the school. And so definitely a lot more stress involved in a transformational type of change. So those are the three levels of change that I'm going to refer back to. And I think what I'd like to do is get some feel for where the group is. Where do they see the changes that they're doing at their site? How would you categorize them? So developmental change, give you another example of that. I won't have you pre-respond, but at the adult school, we started using Huntington Beach Adult School email account. So we just implemented that last year. And that was something that everyone agreed that we should do. There's some benefits to our students, a little bit of training for the staff. There was some resistance just because they didn't know how whether students would use them or not. But for the most part, teachers were on board. Didn't impact classified staff that much. Didn't disrupt our normal processes. And so I would categorize that as a developmental change. So I'm going to give you guys some time to think about some of the changes you've implemented in recent years, maybe this year, and see if you would call them a developmental change. Just kind of list them. You don't have to get too elaborate, but just tell us what you did, and you think it's one of those not very stressful, not very impactful on staff in a negative way. So I'll give some time for that. those are great examples, right on and clear on that definition. And honestly, this is just my way of stealing your guys' ideas. So I appreciate you guys write them all down. Just kidding about that, but actually I'm not. There's some good things on there. I might pursue. Don't tell my staff yet. And obviously that sharing of ideas, some of you folks might see some things that you want to pursue as well. And now you have some names of folks who've done it and definitely could reach out to. I'm sure everyone would be happy to help out implement these developmental changes. So I thank you for that. I appreciate that. I'm going to go to the next question. And that is transitional change. And the example I give from my school of a little bit more impactful of a change, and that is our online enrollment system. When we implemented that, that was a school-wide endeavor. All of our programs went to online enrollment a few years ago. That actually for us required training of most of our clerical staff, if not all of them. They were nervous. Change in office procedures and forms. They were frustrated. At the beginning, students would call the front office and then they'd start asking technical questions if the website's not working. And that, again, caused some fear and frustration for my staff. And Allison, feel free to call me on that because it was quite an experience. At the end of it, it was over quickly. The whole process didn't take too long, other than the tech support, learning how to troubleshoot help students. But that was a little more impactful. It did cause some discomfort for staff. But now my staff actually is a little, I would say in general, they're a lot more comfortable with technology and our systems that we have in place. And we've added a couple more things. So you got some examples of that. I'd love to see them. Yeah, technology in the classroom, that's another big one. Yes, I've heard that from the prisons, the schools and prisons, that internet access is a no-no, and totally feel for you. I can only imagine how difficult that is. Linda, I'm going to follow up with you on that Spanish high set. great programs, great things you guys are doing. Some of those are transitional, I believe you, and some, I bet in some cases they could have turned into transformational type changes that I'm going to talk about in a minute. But great stuff, and that ISET Spanish is something I've been wanting. It's been out there and following up with you guys. Mandatory events for all students focus on transitions. Oh, that's a good one, and in the next slide, I'm gonna talk about transformational changes, and you're gonna see something similar to what you guys are writing in my example. And for us, the example I want to use is a new orientation, a mandatory orientation that was in response to improving student persistence. And we've struggled for many years about the fact that our students, they enroll, they're excited, and then a month later they stop coming because life kicks in. The example I always give, I'm half joking here, but student drops out because their girlfriend breaks up with them and they just can't do school anymore. It's the end of the world. And those type of decision-making processes that our students struggle with was something that my staff kept bringing up. They just, for whatever reason, they'll drop out. Any reason, they'll drop out. And some of them valid. Some of them childcare issues. Some of them some very serious social issues, family issues that they were dealing with. And so we embarked on trying to address those things, and that we did that through a mandatory orientation. And what I mean by mandatory is no student would be allowed to start a class without going through this orientation. This is for our adult ed classes, our ACT, ESL, diploma, and so we spent about 4 months planning out the curriculum, getting input from staff. What are the things that we want us to talk about with students before they come into class? We talk about everything from hygiene, where to get help for your classwork, what staff's available to help them, counselors and such. And so we really designed a long orientation program that now is also including the enrollment process and cost assessment. So it's this big thing. It required us to change schedules of staff so that we can make sure we have a morning one and an evening one, and at various locations, not just at our main campus. We've got 4 main locations that we operate out of. So we had a scheduled staff at sites and at times that were beneficial to students, that would work for students. Some staff took on new duties. They had to be part of that presentation or part of the assessment process. So a lot of stress involved, a lot of planning, a lot of impact on staff. And that really has changed our school, because in many ways, this is the first class that a student takes, and our teachers are expected to take it from there, in that we've already covered some of the main topics about that get in the way of students coming to school, and teachers are supposed to continue that. Remind students, hey, remember in class you talked about their counselor, and the counselor's available, and she's in your hand, her information is in your handbook. So it really is impacting our whole program and the culture of our good student support services, and how we as a staff, entirely from clerical staff to counselors to teachers, administrators, we are providing and focusing on support services first orientation. And so that's our big one. Again, it's changed our school, and it's continuing to change our school. So I welcome any other ideas. How many hours is it? It is 4 hours. Yes. And my original goal was no more than 2. And there was no way to get around assessments with CASAS, which is an hour and a half to 2 hours by itself. The orientation is about an hour and a half, and then we have to get them through enrollment with all their information, and we ask a lot of, as you know, questions. We did do it initially over a 2 separate days, but now we're consolidating because it was so impactful on work schedules that we are basically doing 2 per day per site. So we have 8 orientations scheduled a week, and it's all going to be done in one setting, and we have asked our students to bear with it. We're going to try to make it fun. Yes, I'm happy to share the curriculum. I'll write that down. Share the whole thing with you guys. But again, my staff's nervous about it because they feel for their students, and they feel that a 4-hour session might be too much for them. But the idea of having them come to one orientation, say, and then have to come back for assessment, that just set up more hurdles before they get into class. And yes, we do offer CTE classes. So is our retention rate sitting? We're starting the one sitting April. After spring break is when we're implementing that. In fact, we're calendaring out. We have an online calendar. We'll post all the times and locations for that orientation. So I will tell you this: the staff were very nervous about it, and they thought students were going to be bored and hate it, and want to walk out. We've heard quite the opposite from students. They love it. Those of you guys that have orientations, they appreciate having that information up front. And so I'll let you guys share some things too. I don't want to hog that mic. Career Center, academics. Oh, that's great. Results are students they're saying that they love it, and the teachers are seeing better retention. Anecdotally, they're reporting that. We'll be looking at data at the end of the year. Yeah, I'll be happy to send that PowerPoint out. In fact, at the end of this, I'll try to upload that. You guys remind me. I don't want to try it now and screw the program up here. Oh yeah, Linda, once you start getting teachers to talk from different programs, that's I would say you've now touched the transformational change button. The growth of a program from 1 to 6, that's a big, I would say, transformational. The school will look different. You got 6 people working together, and the fact that they have to work together, that will be challenging, possibly stressful. IET is moving us. I think IET is going to be huge for transformational change for our schools. And you're right, and we have the same response from our teachers. They struggle with it. I even struggle with it. I oversee it directly, and not directly over it anymore, but I'm spending a lot of time with my ESL administrator to make sure I'm helping them out and whatever they need to get it implemented. Oh, ESL and Aztecs. just give a few more seconds for last responses on the next slide. Yes, Cheryl. Yeah, I've been. My folks are struggling with that. I keep bringing that up, and so let me know how that goes. I'll keep an eye out for you and hear how that's going. All right. So the examples we've just talked about that I've given you under various change options, change types, have all been under my control pretty much for my program. So where does the negotiation come in? Well, as you can imagine, and I'm sure you guys have done, you've done a lot of negotiating with your own folks internally. Sometimes even though you might be the administrator, the principal of the school, administrative program, you still need to negotiate with your staff. So I'm going to move on and back to the main presentation. So Steve Jobs, we all know who this guy is. Probably some of us are have right next to us a device that's due to his imagination, ingenuity, and really his perspective on change and really seeing change as an opportunity rather than a threat. A little history about Steve Jobs. I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but Steve Jobs, the founder, one of the co-founders of Apple, actually was fired by Apple in 1995. Just because, well, not just because we'll just say his leadership style maybe needed to be a little more sensitive. Steve Jobs is not known to be a sensitive leader. And so at that time in 95, losing his company, a huge change in life. And what he did shortly after is he founded Next Computers and invested $7 million into that company. And 10 years later, sold it to Apple for $427 million. Obviously, Next Computers is not around, but he was a big instrument in that. Obviously, his vision and the company were just phenomenal at that time. And during this time, he also purchased a computer animation division of Lucasfilm that later went on to become called Pixar. And their first movie was Toy Story. So Steve Jobs is a perfect example in his quote of looking at things that are coming our way and really trying to change the way we look at things. And yes, threat, that feeling of threat is the initial natural response for many of us. I'm there with you. I feel it sometimes. But the sooner we move away from the threat perspective to an opportunity perspective, the sooner we can start looking at viable solutions. And staying in that threat modality, the threat way of thinking kind of keeps doors closed, doesn't let you see things sometimes clearly or see the opportunities, while moving to that opportunity mindset, searching out, allows you to search out the opportunities, and maybe those opportunities might exist in partners, might exist in innovation that you might not have thought of that's now presented to you, and growth for your school overall and for your program. So let me get a little bit more into that concept here. So I always talk about with my staff, I'm always looking for the win-win. And I say that as if it's easy to do, and it's not. Obviously, it's not. And it takes time. So I'm trying to reduce it to the main concepts, and I'll share and I'll try to elaborate on each of these areas. And no, Jeff, I don't know if Jeff lost. I see his post and Steve. Hopefully you can hear me, Jeff, or maybe logging back in. So incoming change, we face change. I think we're all waiting for the next change coming from ABG office. And it's just going to happen. There's no way about it. I see a lot of email strands or email exchanges about don't change this process, don't change this. We just got used to this new policy, and now they're changing it. But it's just many times it's out of our control. And my staff would probably say the same thing about me, that I'm constantly changing things. Stresses them out, and I promise every year to slow down, but you play that balance. If you don't change, are you really adapting? Are you really doing what's best for your students? Not only do we experience change coming towards us, our staff would say we're the implementers of change. So it's just a constant in our world. So the steps I've outlined to be effective at getting to that win-win is having empathy. Empathy leads to understanding, and the understanding, either partner or the situation, then leads to opportunity, that I would say, and multiple opportunities that eventually you can pick out a win-win scenario from that. So let me continue on about that. So empathy, what do I mean by empathy? The ability to stand in other people's shoes, to see with their eyes and feel with their hearts. It's a quote by Daniel Pink. I recommend his books on empathy. He's got a book that's called To Sell is Human, and one that's called A Whole New Mind, where he talks about empathy, being able to see different perspectives, to be able to listen to another person, another party, and without jumping to conclusions. Obviously, especially not jumping to negative conclusions, but to really listen and let them explain what it is that they're concerned about, they want to share, and being able to give grace. Not everyone is a master communicator. I've stuck my foot in my mouth many times, and I ask people just to be, forgive me if I've said something wrong that's offensive, but that's never my intent, obviously. But sometimes people just they stumble with the words, and maybe don't present it well. So there's a lot of grace involved in empathy, when you're trying to understand somebody. Give yourself time to consider what is said. What is it that they really want, and what they might have left out of the conversation. Sometimes what they want isn't exactly what they said, and you have to dig a little deeper in the conversation to really try to understand what it is that someone else is asking for. I'll use a case in point I just had a conversation this morning around credentialing and that hot button issue about credentialing. Should we require credentials for adult ed? The colleges don't require credentials, so this is a big topic right now in the state. And in that conversation, you hear a lot about, well, the process is so cumbersome, it's so expensive, and we lose teachers because they never finish the process. Well, it's not the credential that's an issue, it's the process. And so trying to continue to listen and hearing these points, you can kind of get away from the argument on whether it's a credentialing issue or if it's a process in achieving the credential. And so we're trying to listen carefully and really get at what is it that's causing whatever perceived threat is or whatever the challenge is. And so and then reserving judgment. Everyone comes at things from a different perspective. It's not always meant to be a negative one, but I'm not saying it isn't, but reserving judgment until you really know and understand the situation, understand where people are coming from. That's a critical part of empathy, and I guarantee that going this route and trying to be more empathetic for me has just helped me with so many relationships and getting past certain things and having to look the other way when they say something just that's off, maybe offensive, and trying to get past that because I know the person and I know they wouldn't necessarily mean something that's offensive directly to me. It does take time. It's something you have to work at. It comes naturally to some people more than others, and so something that we can all work on and improve on in order, again, to help move us towards understanding, which is the next step that I had identified. That's important in getting to that win-win. So understanding what is important for the other person. Sometimes what they're communicating maybe isn't the most important thing, but having a conversation, you'll start quickly understanding what are the key issues for other folks. What is considered a win for them. So when you're having that conversation, what is it ultimately that they would like to see happen? What are the accountability metrics or the variables that they run by? And I'm thinking right now, community colleges and our collaboration with community colleges and other partners. What are the things that drive their decision making? What are the rules that confine them maybe, or restrict them from doing certain things, or force them to do certain things. What would be considered a loss from their perspective? You already know all these things for yourself, but what are these factors? What are the answers to these questions for working with? And ask clarifying questions. Sometimes you got to keep digging and helping your understanding of what they're dealing with and what they're trying to accomplish. And then transparency both ways is tough. It is totally tough. Sometimes you don't want to share what you've got going on in your program just for fear that they might steal it, or that you might think that it's going to be something of an arguing point. But the sooner you get to transparency, the better you are, or the quicker you are at getting and understanding each other's programs. But building and doing that, sharing and being transparent, that's what builds trust. You got to have that trust if you're going to be able to move forward into some pretty, what I'm going to hopefully give you guys examples of. There's some pretty awesome opportunities, but none of these opportunities I would share with you would be possible without the trust that I've built up and that they have in me. So thank you, Shirley. Yes, empathy is critical in this. So if you understand, if you're able to empathize for the person, see where they're coming from, and then you understand what it is that drives them, what's important for them, then you can start identifying opportunities. I really should have had that title as opportunities in plural. What win conditions do you have in common? So once they've identified that, for example, they're looking for more student enrollments, then maybe that's a common thing that you guys have, that you're also looking for to increase enrollment. So how do you collaborate on that? That's a common goal. That might present an opportunity. Which wins, after you've identified those opportunities, which wins are the easiest to achieve? Some are more costly than others. Some might be the low-hanging fruit that both of you agree on. So going through that process. Which wins have the best results for both of you? Again, that's based on your understanding of what drives each other's programs, and how much will it cost you. Cost sometimes is not just money, but it could be some stress, obviously some stress. It could be some more work that you have to put in on your end with folks on your side, your staff, your district folks, and so there's a cost to that. And so hopefully when you're looking at these opportunities, you're looking for more benefit, obviously, than there is cost. And so some of the benefits you would be looking for are improved relationships, which again would lead to more opportunities down the road, hopefully, as you continue your conversations and you continue your understanding. Better services for students. Maybe you're sharing staff, or they're sending staff over to help recruit students and provide support services in that process. And you come into agreement of there's a time when the recruitment is appropriate, when it's not appropriate. You might have opportunities for more funding for your program because of the partnerships. Those benefits should outweigh the costs that might come along with maybe losing some control of your student population. You start letting some of the partners come onto your campus. Well, what are they going to say? Are they going to just steal our students? Well, that's part of the cost that you might have to take for the benefits that you see that might be outweighing that, should be outweighing in that. And then, of course, the change that's going to happen in your program. Change is always a cost. There's always work around that, and there's always stress, and that you can't mitigate. You can mitigate it, but you can't eliminate it. Seeking this change, this opportunity. So let's see here. So then getting to the win-win. Once you've got through those opportunities and you got that good understanding, and you put some time into developing all these relationships, you get to the win-win, and you got a project or a plan that you're both excited about. You're both behind. You're sharing the effort to make whatever it is you're working on. You're both in it together and working on it and investing in it. It's never perfect, but doing nothing's worse. You can't just sit around, and I think we all recognize that. So a win-win scenario is never going to be perfect, and I think that's the first thing I would reiterate and remind people of. There's going to be bumps in the road. There's always some little challenges you got to get through, and sometimes it's one of those things that you might have to just swallow something and deal with it, because the benefits, again, are outweighing issues on it. At the end of it, everyone's happy. The win-win basically means everyone's happy with what they're getting as a result of this partnership or this program you're endeavoring on. And so, those are the elements you would look for in a win-win. If you're missing one of those, then you probably want to go back and think about it before you go any further. So once you've got that win-win, you've got that great idea, you're excited, you can't wait to start. Remember that you're the one person who went through all the empathy, the understanding, identifying the opportunities, all these negotiations, discussion with your partners. And everybody back at home at your school site hasn't had that experience. They're starting at step one as far as threat, opportunity, empathy, understanding. That process has to happen with your folks back at home, back at your school. Don't forget your district folks. For sure, do not forget your district folks, your superintendents, board members. Keep them in the loop, whatever that process you guys have in place locally. But you want to make sure you're messaging this, start early, maybe even share the idea that you're working on with your district level superiors or your principal, whoever it might be that you report to. Just keep them in the loop. Expect pushback. It's natural. They don't have all the pieces, like I said earlier. They haven't been through that process. And then remember the benefits that you're looking to achieve and communicate those benefits. Don't lose sight of them when people start asking questions, start raising issues. Yes, address those questions, address the issues, but quickly remind them that the benefits are worth it. You've seen it. You see the opportunity, the benefits. And the process takes time. Obviously, you guys all know it doesn't happen overnight. Give it the time it needs, and don't rush it, because and the opportunity, the benefits that are waiting, you don't want to risk that. So if it means slowing down a little bit more than you wanted to, then that's sometimes what you have to do. All right, so as you implement the change and you're starting this new, whatever it's going to be, shared IET program with a CTE teacher from the colleges and ESL teacher from your program working together, you're going to start this great program. You guys had some transformational changes listed, orientation, pathways, career pathways, and so forth. This graph I found after some friends reminded me of this graph out there, the impact of change and minimizing that change. If you look at this graph, basically it's just telling you whenever you hit change or you're going to implement change, you're going to see a drop in performance. That's unavoidable. When you communicate to folks initially, maybe you're in this realm, and I sometimes start on the red line where I think, oh, I'm going to implement a change, and everything's going to be great. It's perfect. It's going to improve our performance. More students are going to be served. We're going to have more outcomes, better outcomes. And the reality is that you're going to be somewhere in between the blue and the green, ideally the green. But you got to plan for avoiding a steep downturn in performance. And I'll give the example of imagining implementing an online enrollment system, and you don't train anyone, you don't tell them you're implementing, it just gets turned on the website, and now your staff is just trying to figure out what happened. Why are these students calling about online enrollment? We don't know anything about it. So that would be an example of where you'd be down the blue line. Unless you're messaging, unless you're training folks, and you're checking to make sure all your pieces, you've got a plan for implementation. You've got a well laid out plan, and you're hitting marks as far as things getting done at the right times before moving to the next steps. So there's a lot of planning and organizing around any change. You're going to avoid a drop in performance, and eventually over time you could keep that online. You could implement the online. Eventually staff would get used to it, students would get used to it, but at a cost that you could have avoided. And so you're trying to minimize that change curve, the performance curve. But just recognize it's there. No matter where you're at. There is a handout. I did include this as a separate handout that you can use with your staff to help in the messaging to help them understand this is just natural, that we're going to see a little bit, some hiccups. Things might slow down, or we might see, heaven forbid, a drop of enrollment, but it's part of the process. So people get used to it and have adapted all the pieces effectively. So I share that handout with you, share with your staff. Communicating change. Okay, so it comes down to relationships. Is what I'm getting to. A lot of these negotiations, obviously, you can't negotiate with yourself. You got to know you're negotiating with other folks. Seek out relationships, build them, work on them, strengthen them, invest in them, invest your time. That is critical to seeing opportunity and getting to a win. And that's some advice I got early on in adult ed, that it's really a lot about what we do outside of our schools, build in partnerships and bring other resources to our schools. So here's some examples I'll share. I'm sure there's other great examples that you guys have gone through, but here are the ones for our adult school that we've in the recent years worked on and developed. So under the topic or the idea, this concept of shared space, so we have a relationship with an organization called Simon U Foundation, and at the time they were supporting a space, basically allowing us to use a space at the Westminster Mall. They're a sister organization to the Simon Group, which owns all the premium outlets. It owns some of the 300 malls across the United States, and so they were interested in helping students graduate high school that were at risk or have dropped out of school. And they were working with our community day school, giving them space. And they had about 5,500 square feet at the mall. And students, they were probably graduating about 3 to 5 students a year. Well, when I presented the opportunity to work with the adult school as well, they got really excited about that, because then all of a sudden we were graduating anywhere from 80 to 150 students a year. So we expanded the facility, blew it out, and we had a second add-on for the adult ed program that now I have 7,500 square foot just for adult ed at the Westminster Mall. No rent, no lease. I just pay utilities. That cost me about $24,000 a year for 7,500 square feet at the mall, and it's been a hit. In the same way, local elementary schools, they give me free use of space if I offer an ESL class for their students' parents. And I think many of us are doing that too, but that's a relationship that I actually inherited and I had to maintain. And I know I can go, and I get calls from principals asking, can I have an ESL class on my campus? Just because I've met them somewhere, they know about the programs I offer. We owe a Title I right now. Our out-of-school youth provider for the county is working with us, and we're in collaboration. Looks like we're going to lease out another space that they will pay for. We might contribute something to that, but then they're going to staff it with some of their folks that work with connecting our students with jobs, paid job internships. They'll pay for their training, and that'll be right next door to our high school diploma learning center, where we have an ESL class also. We're excited about that. Again, that was 3 years of relationships, going to meetings, getting to know these folks, understanding what drives their thinking, what are they interested in, and finally getting to a point where we can talk about, hey, there's an opportunity here where we both benefit. You guys get more of a population you can serve easier. A site, you get a site that's that has a lot of exposure and maybe at a cheaper cost than what they were paying for. In my workings as a high school principal or adult school principal, I'm also working with the high school principals, and just a conversation I was having with them, and they had I mentioned that we're looking for, wish we had more counselors, and they had said that they had a counselor that was only working part-time, and so we actually worked it out so that we added a one-day counselor. I had a 4-day counselor, and I hired on another 1-day counselor at the shared cost. And so I'm not paying the full benefits. I'm paying just a small portion of the benefits for this counselor, but I get a full person for our ESL program, Vietnamese speaking, bilingual Vietnamese, that's supporting our ESL students. And then one we're working on right now, and I'm going to wrap it up pretty quick, is our Orange Coast College non-credit ESL partnership. And this AB 86 conversation started. I knew the colleges were getting into the non-credit realm, and conversations about obviously the threat was there. I think we all have recognized that threat. But realizing that and helping them realize that we had a 2,000 to 2,500 students, depending on the year, students enrolled in our ESL programs. And how can we work that out so that you're getting apportionment and they're coming to class? How can we work it out so you guys get apportionment for that? Now, my concern was I did not want to lose control of my programs. I did not. These are my staff, my relationships that I've built. I'm not going to risk that. And so it took a while, and their initial suggestion was, well, we'll just send our teachers over there. And then I had to quickly explain, well, if you do that, then my teachers don't have a job, and that's not going to work. That's a non-starter. So we went through a number of bouts of figuring out how to make this work. And at the end of it, as it stands right now, the proposal is we will provide the instruction, and as long as my teachers meet the qualifications for being on their staff, we have an MOU in place. We will have an MOU in place where they will reimburse us the cost of the classes for the teachers that qualify. So I'm looking at about 3 to 4 ESL teachers, which means about 6 sections or so that the college will reimburse me for, and they will claim apportionment for and get reimbursed by the state. And it's called an instructional service agreement is actually the technical term that the colleges use. We used to use that in adult ed with the CTE partnerships with private vendors. But this instructional service agreement is the tool that I learned about in conversations with people not even in my consortium. But I heard about them, and I think some of us have been approached by colleges about instructional service agreement. But in what I'm working on right now is I don't lose control of my staff, my programs. It's my school. They just are happy to be able to claim apportionment and claim it legally. So those are my examples. I went through them pretty quick. So with that, I'm going to open it up and give you guys an opportunity to share ideas. Maybe it's something you're working on right now that we can all look into further. You've already shared a number, but is there anything else that you're looking at as far as making some changes or some relationships you're developing that you think might prove fruitful and some benefits for your program? I'll open up that chat window. I know we're over time by a couple minutes. Why don't we spend 3 minutes on that? I think we'd all benefit from seeing some ideas. We will. That's a great question. So the question about attendance, are we claiming attendance on ours? We are claiming it for purposes of reporting outcomes. We agreed that we would report the outcomes. They would report the attendance. Because we don't report right now, at least, we do not. Our attendance is not tied to apportionment. We don't see that as an issue, double dipping, if you will. And so, we will be reporting our outcomes. We owe outcomes, learning gains, and they're happy just to get the apportionment. And it only works because our teachers, and I've said this to them, and it's just the fact is our teachers cost less. They don't make as much as a community college person. I don't see our union negotiating, at least right now, to try to equalize that pay, bring our teachers up to whatever it is, $70 an hour. I'm just guessing at that. I know it's up there a lot higher than ours. The community college, in our situation, they're developing a non-credit program. And interesting enough, when the proposal to send staff over to our sites, and we've got sites at churches, elementary schools, senior centers, when that was proposed, I asked them clearly, just for an understanding, because most, if not all of the classes that our colleges offer are offered on the main campus that they have, the big college campuses. And I asked them, do you really think your teachers are going to want to go out to these remote sites and work off campus and not stay within the college atmosphere? That's when they kind of started realizing, no, that might not work, because the reality was they had an opportunity to go into the community a few years ago for one of our members that didn't want to do adult ed anymore, and they turned it down because they did not want to go to a remote site. When I say they, they're ESL staff. So administration recognized that, and ultimately they also saw that if they were to send staff out, there's some requirements about oversight of the site. They'd take on the burden of maintaining those relationships, and that was something that they thought at the end that they would not want to take that.
All right, Steve, I want to thank you very much for the presentation today. We are over time by just a little bit, and so I'm going to make sure that you all have Steve's information. His contact information is on this last slide, and of course he provided that because he makes himself available to help administrators and to support his colleagues in the field in any way. So please continue the conversation, and please reach out to him. The quote that he has there, life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass, it's about learning to dance in the rain. And I think that is quite fitting for the session that we've had this afternoon with Steve. Again, I really appreciate the information, the content. It was very valuable. I want to make sure that everyone is aware of our next webinar that will be coming up on May the 22nd. It will be on the topic of interest-based decision-making. You'll be getting an email inviting you to join that webinar in the near future. But please mark your calendars now. Again, interest-based decision-making on May the 22nd. Steve,